Well, welcome everyone to the League of Women Voters Candidates Forum for North Dakota District 27 as our first one for this evening. I want to welcome all the participants and, of course, all the candidates for attending today. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We also work to increase the understanding of major public policy issues. Really want to thank the City of Fargo for allowing us to use the City Commission chambers for this forum. And we want to express our great thanks to all the city employees who assisted us in the setup and the videotaping of tonight's forum. The forum will air on, so it is being broadcast live on the City of Fargo's Facebook page, and then also the link is there and available afterwards as well. And we'll link to that on our League of Women Voters Facebook page as well. On behalf of the League, we want to thank all the candidates for attending and the members of the audience for their participation. So how the forum is run is all the questions do come from the audience. So we've been handing out note cards as people have been coming in. Looks like there's extras back there on the table. If you think of another question during the forum, you can grab one from there. And then just hold it up. If you have your completed question, they'll bring it up to the moderator. As far as the format, each candidate will get a minute and a half for an opening statement, and that will start on this side with Mr. Garrick, and then the first question will go to Ms. Roars, and then we'll go kind of on down the line. So every person will probably get at least an opportunity to be the first person to answer the question at least once, and then we'll conclude with a minute and a half closing statement from each candidate. If you are writing a question, please put one question per card, and also the questions will be asked of every candidate, so no question just for one candidate, please. All right, and so with that, we will begin. Candidate Garrick, if you want to start off with the opening statements.
Perfect. I'd like to first thank the League of Women Voters and the City of Fargo for hosting tonight's event. My name is Quinn Garrick. I'm running for the state senate because I think it's time that there's a new perspective in the state legislature. I think it's time we need to design policy that lasts beyond 2 years of a legislative session and find meaningful solutions for the long run. Because as somebody that is beginning to settle down here in Fargo, any policy created over the next few years will have a more lasting effect on the future of young people, including myself, in this state. When elected, I plan on working to ensure economic security for everyone across the state by creating a diverse and vibrant economy through development in every industry, to establish safeguards for young families by ensuring adequate child care services, proper education funding, and increased economic opportunities, and to build a more efficient and effective state government through administrative reforms, substantial internal evaluation, and stable fiscal responsibility. It's my goal to ensure a prosperous North Dakota that would work for everyone and is better prepared for the future, not just for the next 2 years. Thanks.
Candidate Roars.
Hello. I'd like to echo Mr. Garrick's thanks to the League of Women Voters and to the city for hosting this forum and giving us this opportunity to speak to our constituents. A little bit about myself. My name is Kristen Roars. I am a nurse and have been for the last 14 years. I work at Sanford and have lived in Fargo now for 7 years. I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in a family that raised me to be fiscally responsible and look at the big picture as well as the details when trying to find solutions to different issues. The issues that are most important to me are workforce, working in healthcare. One of the things that we've really encountered over the course of the last few years is the difficulty finding workforce, and so how do we make this a vibrant community, a vibrant state that people want to come live, work, and stay in? Decreasing regulation in every industry. We've gotten to the point where something may have been put in place for a safety reason, but the outcome of it is we're filling out a form for the sake of filling out the form or checking a box for the sake of checking that box. And so how can we work to really decrease that regulation? And the last one is ensuring that we have adequate business growth and retention, and that really plays right back into that workforce. Thank you.
All right, Candidate Beadle.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to just continue to echo support for the League of Women Voters and having this forum here. I know there's been some issues with candidates not necessarily showing up, but we want to just emphasize that, we think it's important to be able to come out, connect with our constituents, answer questions for the public, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. I know I've talked with Ruth. We're looking at trying to get another one down at Davies High School, hosted by the Davies Speech and Student Congress team. Hopefully we'll be able to get that to come together and do that with all of us as well. That'd be a fun opportunity. For those that don't know me, my name is Thomas Beadle. I've served in the State House Representatives for the last 8 years in District 27. My wife Shane and I live down by Bethany Homes on 42nd Street. I've been a commercial real estate broker here in town for the last 10 years. Recently, I joined Super Studio as a business development manager, doing some graphic design marketing work over in that area. My emphasis and background legislatively has been heavily involved with higher education, workforce development, and working to grow our economy through various programs to help create more diversity within our economic system. That's an area that I think that we need to continue to focus on. On the Higher Education Committee right now, we've been really looking at ways to bring innovation, foster new technologies, expand the reach, and make sure NDSU and UND are very prominent institutions regionally and nationally competitive. On a workforce development and higher education standpoint, we also need to make sure that we're continuing to train and mold our young people in the state so that they become valuable resources to help solve some of the workforce shortage issues we have going across the country. And I think we need to make sure we have a continued strong growth to go to help maintain that economic growth going forward for our city. And that's an area that I've worked on heavily for the last 8 years, and is an area that I hope to be able to continue to work on here in North Dakota.
Thank you. Candidate Buffalo.
Hi, good evening. I too want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues up here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to the City of Fargo and to Cable One for making tonight's event possible. I also want to thank our colleagues up here for being here tonight, and I look forward to a meaningful discussion on our forum. My name is Ruth Buffalo, and I'm originally from Mandaree, which is a small rural town in western North Dakota, but I'm no stranger to Fargo. I'm also a high school graduate of an area school here and alumni from NDSU's Master of Public Health, Go Bison. I am a public health professional and educator. My husband and I are small business owners, and we live in South Fargo. I want to say South Fargo because we can almost see South Dakota, I think, from our house. But just happy to be here and really want to emphasize the importance of working together for all generations, all future generations, for a more prosperous North Dakota. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Candidate Baining.
Thank you to the League, and thank you to the City of Fargo for allowing us to use their chambers once again. I've been elected since first elected in 2002. I've served in District 27. Actually, I have had to move once or twice to stay within my district, being with redistricting. Currently, I'm on administrative rules, which we really get to the heart of administrative things out there to protect the people out there for health care, for sorry about that, I'm a little bit nervous here tonight, which I shouldn't be, but one thing about administrative rules, I've been on that committee since I've been out there, and we really work with a lot of the daycares and stuff out there, and other parts of the government out there to lower our regulations out there. That seems to be what one thing government does well is do regulations. We try to hold them off in that. I've also served in IT for this interim session. Over the last 8 sessions, I've served on GVA, which does a lot of stuff with veterans and with those, and been on judiciary for 6 years. We worked on a lot of real tough issues in my first sessions out there with meth and so forth, and I think we finally had that pretty well stopped. Now we got influx of opioids coming into the state from around the country and around the world coming into the state. So that's one of the things we really have to look at. We need to look at the funding for opioids, how to get rid of them. I don't think it's always prison that everybody needs to go to, but I think one of the things we have to look at with the opioids is find out where they're coming from, get them stopped, get them treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Candidate Kitzman.
Once again, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this. I'd like to thank all of everyone here for attending. A little bit about myself. My name is John Kitzman. I was born in Fargo. I've lived here my entire life. Went to school at NDSU. I currently work as an IT consultant. I spent some time at Microsoft. So my background is technology. I'm very geeky. Some of my issues that I am passionate about, education, specifically early childhood education, making those investments. I'm interested in growing the tech sector here in North Dakota. I work remotely, putting in place an environment that's going to foster that so that other North Dakotans can kind of take the same path that I've taken. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So for our first question, we'll start with Candidate Roars, which may be to be expected. The thing that has been asked about most often already is about property taxes. So I'm going to kind of combine the two questions together. How do you feel about the rise in property taxes? And then what is the role of the state in cutting property taxes? So how do you feel about the rise in property taxes? And what is the role of the state in cutting property taxes?
Thank you. The rise in property taxes is something that I believe is one of the things that affects the quality of living in Fargo especially the most. One of the things that is the most difficult, and I experienced it when I moved here, is understanding the tax structure here between specials and property taxes. It is very different than it is in many other communities. And so trying to help people understand that one-to-one ratio between two like houses is very difficult. And so I think that one of the things is helping to work with the city and figuring out how do we structure the property taxes in Fargo especially to make it a little simpler for people to understand. And then the second piece is how the state plays a role, I believe, along the same path that they've already started, continuing to help fund the K-12 education to help keep that portion of property taxes in check.
All right, thank you. Candidate Beadle.
Thank you. With regards to property taxes, specials, and everything, we've kind of taken the mentality in North Dakota that we truly value local control. I think that's true on the whole when we're dealing with government relations, is we think that the government closest to the people is best equipped to make the decisions for the people. As such, on your property tax statement, almost everything is controlled by your cities, your school boards, your counties, and I strongly encourage everyone to vote in the June primary elections, as that's when those leaders are elected and chosen. From the state's perspective, however, over the last few years, we know that this has been a problem, so we've been trying to address it. We have significantly increased K-12 funding and forced the school districts to lower their mills accordingly. We have taken over county social services funding, which has reduced the county taxes 8% in order to offset that funding. But now we need to take another step farther. Special assessments is really the area that everyone's concerned about. We're having a taxation committee meeting tomorrow discussing that. City of Fargo on a new development project adds about 17% onto the cost of the project for the infrastructure. That's what they build in to cover their costs, as well as make sure they have some stuff going to the future. West Fargo's at 12%. I think really the specials is where people have more concern right now, and I think that's where our attention needs to go, and I'm committed to taking steps to address that going forward.
Thank you. And Candidate Buffalo.
So can you hear me? Okay. From knocking doors this past summer and recently, that has been a topic that has come up most among constituents, is their concern of rising property taxes, especially young people and seniors. They're afraid of losing their homes to the continued rising property taxes. So it definitely needs attention. There definitely needs to be a balance in there. When we work in there, meaning between all different levels of state government. And I also want to echo the importance of paying attention to all levels of city government, county government, and state and federal, because they're all connected. And again, at the city level, that's where we see a lot of this with the specials. And how I feel, again, is the state's role is, again, would play an important part in this by having communication with the different levels of government. Thank you.
Candidate Manning.
Thank you. I guess one of the things when it comes to the property tax, the state of North Dakota only levies 1 mil for the state hospital, for the state medical school up in Grand Forks. But we've been buying down the property taxes over the years. One of the things that always, property tax is a big issue here in the state, around the state, all over. People are complaining about the property tax. One thing I think we need to look at is we've got to try to control the local property taxes a little bit better. I think maybe the citizens should have an opportunity to vote on raising property taxes over a certain level. I think another step we should be taking is having school votes for bond issues, have those on regular scheduled election days, not special elections. I think that's one of the biggest issues. I think we would probably see a different format out there, funding levels and so forth, but I think we need to get more people involved to vote on this. We just passed another mill levy over in West Fargo, which they need the schools and stuff, but I think we need to look at some of these other issues that trying to get more people involved.
Thank you. Candidate Kitzman.
I'd like to see the state do more in reducing property taxes. I think that's kind of been the number one thing that I've heard when I've been door knocking is that property taxes are too high. They're not talking about other taxes. I think there's other ways of raising that revenue and having the state involved in that that's going to allow us to lower property taxes.
All right, thank you. And candidate Garrick.
I've been hearing the same concerns that the rest of them have been hearing. People are concerned about their property taxes being increased. To echo what Ms. Roars said, though, the state needs to focus on our K through 12 funding and ensuring that that funding is getting to those schools so that local governments aren't having to pick up the tab and then increase property taxes through that way in order to cover those costs.
All right, thank you. Okay, so for our next question, we'll start with candidate Beadle. So the question is concerning cuts to higher education. How can we increase funding for higher education without cutting other services?
So we all know in the last legislative session, we had the ultimate bad storm hanging over North Dakota when we came in during the 2017 cycle. We had oil prices in the tank, we had commodity prices in the tank. That led to some pretty significant reductions in revenue coming into the state. Sales tax revenue in particular dropped tremendously. And as a result, adjustments were made to a number of budgets across the state in order to make sure that we lived within our means. With regards to higher education, we did have to roll back some cuts, some of the spending to our university system. I believe right now we rolled back down to about the 2011 levels is the level that we took higher education back down to. We know that we need to make some investments back into there just because from the sheer metrics of things, we have more students that are starting to go there. Enrollment's down a little bit this fall, but if you look at the K-12 population, we know it's going to be increased. We have a funding formula in place to make sure that we have equitable funding across our campuses, but we need to make sure that the resources are there. So I think we're going to be able to increase it just because revenue for the state as a whole is back there, but we're going to need to prioritize. Distance education brings new challenges. The revamping and innovating in higher education that the Higher Ed Task Force is looking at is going to adjust some structures there. But we definitely need to make sure that NDSU and UND have the resources to train our students adequately.
Okay. All right, and candidate Buffalo.
So from having worked in higher education for 11 years, each year what we saw was having to advocate for additional funding every year, having to be creative with the funds that we were given. So trying to find innovative ways within an organization is challenging, but there definitely needs to be support. UND, NDSU should be known and should stay as the top-notch universities that they are in research and being land-grant institutions. So we really need to support our local higher education institutions, including our vocational and technology schools, and also linking those with the business and industry. Thank you.
All right, and candidate Baining.
Thank you. Higher ed is a real big beast out there. We did cut their budget this last time. I don't know how this, I think this next biennium we'll be able to probably increase their budget some more. I know there's some proposals out there to do some different things, different models out there for higher ed, for investment into higher ed and so forth. But I think one of the things we have to look at, we did go across the board and we did cut a lot of budgets out there. The only other way we could have probably increased funding out there, kept everything whole, was to raise taxes out there. And I don't think the people of the state of North Dakota were looking for our state for any income tax raises. That would have been probably the only way that we'd have been able to fully fund it to what it was the previous biennium. So I think that's one of the things we really have to look at out there is the good funding level. I know the student numbers are down, but I think those numbers are down region-wide for the students coming in because I think a lot of them are out in the workforce versus going to college like I did when the economy was really good. I think that's, we'll probably see a surge in, maybe 5 to 10 years again with a lot of them come in, but I think we're going to see a different situation in the next few years.
And candidate Kitzman.
Right. I believe funding higher education is very important. I think in the last legislative session, I believe the oil extraction tax had been cut, reducing our revenue there. That would be one thing that we could look at rolling back instead of increasing income taxes. Like it's been said previously, definitely we've been hurting revenue-wise because of downturn in the economy. I think we need to plan longer term for these kinds of things, because going in and every 2 years slashing the budget and then coming back and building it back up, you're destroying these long-term investments that these educational institutions are making.
Candidate Garrick.
I think that higher education funding is a conversation that is going to be extremely important in the next legislative session, especially when we're discussing the budget. But one things we need to look at is like the higher education funding model in general, and also where we're getting our revenue from. And with obviously with our economy coming back, we may see those revenue streams start to increase. So there may be more funding available for higher education. So it's definitely something that we need to have a conversation about. Especially as a student, I see like tuition increases and fee increases having to cover the costs, and it still doesn't even make up for what we're seeing in cuts from the state. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at. And then looking at where we can reduce costs in administrative burdens. So not having to make certain cuts in other services across the state, but at least like administrative costs that we can reduce.
And candidate Roars.
I love going last. So one of the things that we really need to do is look at some critical investments. I think that we have aging buildings that are coming due, and staff salaries, we need to make sure that we are funding those two things off the bat, because those two have been the things that have gotten put on the back burner for the past few sessions when they have had to make cuts. And I think that the total dollars aren't going to be a dramatic increase, so I believe higher education is still going to have to learn how to prioritize through innovation. That shift from in-person to online is something that we need to continue that innovation there, and then look at some sort of a public-private partnership for some of the growth areas. And one of the ways that innovation can really work is things like the Career Academy, the K through 12, tying them in with the trades. I know that they have looked at a school down in South Dakota, which actually my nephew graduated from, and was able to take advantage of that. And how can we mimic that here and really work to improve our system that way?
All right, thank you. We've made it all the way around. All right. So then, Ruth Buffalo, our next question starts with you. What can be done to improve health care in North Dakota? So what can be done to improve health care in North Dakota?
Well, healthcare encompasses a lot of areas, and one of the hot topics that we can all agree upon is that of behavioral health and mental health services. I also want to commend the First Lady for taking the initiative to destigmatize mental health across our state. That's very important for people to seek the care that they deserve and need. But again, looking at how can we improve healthcare, there's so much work that needs to be done as a public health professional. Definitely taking a proactive upstream approach and getting to the root cause of illnesses definitely needs a team approach. Also making sure that our rural hospitals and communities survive. So again, using that innovative approaches, maybe looking at the community paramedic model, and then looking at the community health worker model, which again is looking at the front end of the continuum of care. So really, there's so much that needs to be done, from addressing the workforce shortage, because North Dakota does have a healthcare professional shortage, and building a strong system within our communities to keep our graduates here in the state of North Dakota. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Baining?
Thank you. You know, healthcare is a big issue. I think in Fargo we've got a premier facility out in Sanford, being there a Trauma One Center now. I drive down the roads, I see ambulances coming into Fargo from all over. I think we really need to look at the rural health care. That is the biggest access issue out there. I used to have a hospital in my hometown of Hankinson. Now the closest one is, I think it's in Breckenridge, which is 30 miles away, or 40 miles to Oaks. But they're just take care of the small issues out there. They're not, trauma centers and so forth. I think we really need to work with the first responders to get them equipped the way they need to be, to get them, in order to get them into a trauma center to take care of their needs, whether it's a stroke, a heart attack. Years ago, it was just basically picked them up and hauled them into a hospital. But now we've got the technology out there. We can do the paramedic things. EMTs out there are really great to training. I think that's one thing we really need to focus on, is the rural areas, being the hospitals are so far apart, and work on some way possibly to get them a better pay out there.
Thank you. Candidate Kitzman?
So as Ruth has said, addressing the shortage of healthcare workers in our state, anything we can do to build that workforce up, educate them here, convince them to stay here is going to help. As I've been out door knocking, I've heard a number of concerns about mental health funding and being able to, again, address those issues before they become more serious. I think making that investment there is going to pay off in the long run.
Candidate Garrick?
I think it starts with greater investments in public health services and preventative care, taking care of an issue before it becomes an issue, I guess, to help prevent certain things before they become something that we can't handle anymore. And then also making sure that there's appropriate funding and resources for healthcare in rural areas and communities, and then implementing innovative technology and services to help reduce costs.
Candidate Roars?
Okay, this is my favorite question. So I would say, I would echo Ms. Buffalo's comments about mental health and addiction funding, and how do we create some innovative care models to be able to deliver that, not just in our major cities. How do we create a way to provide that mental health funding or that mental health care in areas that don't necessarily have caregivers in their community? I think primary preventative care, utilizing telehealth. The majority of healthcare dollars are spent in the final few days of life. And so how do we move those dollars to the front end of care to prevent major health issues rather than spending them in the final days of life? And one of the other things, just to add on to the EMS, the rural EMS funding model, they don't get paid unless they take someone to the hospital. And so how do we continue to figure out, how do we adjust that funding model so that they also can be pulled into that preventative model?
And Candidate Beadle?
For healthcare, I think we can all start off by saying that we agree that the federal government has screwed this up for generations. But for North Dakota, it really comes down to access, affordability, and intervention. So with regards to access, we need to make sure that healthcare facilities are available, prevalent around the market, and that people don't have to travel too far distances to receive healthcare. We're a very rural state. There's a lot of miles for some of these rural communities, and having some of these smaller communities have some regional medical centers is tremendously important. The Jamestown one is a vital example of that. Additionally, making sure that we fund nursing programs, healthcare programs at the University School, North Dakota School of Medicine, so we can train physicians and get them out in the marketplace, helps provide that access to people. From an affordability standpoint, there's certain things that we can take. Certainly, there's some additional dollars that can be put in there, but we can also help with programs like making sure autistic children have insurance coverage. That's a bill that I sponsored last session in order to help make sure that there was therapies being treated. And then on the intervention side of things, we've invested heavily. The behavioral recovery reinvented by the First Lady is a prime example of changing that conversation, connecting the players, making sure they're there. Last session, we funded $7.5 million of community grant programs to help with some of those behavioral health issues, as well as $2.4 million of substance abuse issues to make sure that they are treating the patients and having rehabilitation, not just incarcerating them. So there's a lot of things that we can do, a lot of things we can continue to do, but we certainly do have a good start.
Thank you. So for our next question, we'll start with Candidate Baining. If elected, how would you work across the aisle to get things done?
Thank you. That's always a great question out there. I think one of the things we really need to do is we need to have some legislation out there that both sides can agree on. Whether it's taxes, we probably won't agree on taxes probably at all. We won't agree on a lot of things. But there are issues out there that hopefully we can work together on, is funding for higher ed. That's probably a big issue out there. I think we can come together on that with some good proposals on both sides. Taxes, I don't know, there probably is not going to be one on that issue. But I think one of the things, work across the aisle, I think we do a lot of work across the aisle in our committee hearings. Maybe our bills, all of our bills come through the committee side, and we fix them, we tweak them, we do other things with them. So I think it's the one thing, the first thing we need to do is get along. We can't be calling people names. We have to actually be cordial to each other out there. I think what's happening in Washington, D.C. has been over the top. I think we need to we got to come back up a couple of steps and actually get to know the people on both sides of the aisle, get to like them. I worked with a lot of them on the other side of the aisle, and they've been great friends, and they will be forever.
Candidate Kitzman?
I believe that ideas live in a meritocracy. Good ideas should be advanced, bad ideas should be left behind. It doesn't matter who's coming up with those ideas, if they're good ideas, if they're positive, if that's what's good for our district, if that's what's good for our state, that's what I should be advancing as a legislator. I agree with some of what Brandy had said. It's definitely important to get along with the people that you are working with, the people in the legislature. Be civil to them. Don't take things personally. Thank you.
And Candidate Garrick.
I think it starts with respect. Disagreement doesn't mean disrespecting somebody else. It's about finding compromise. I mean, where I grew up in a very conservative district, coming from a fairly liberal household. I've worked with numerous of the legislators that represented my family, and worked with them and advocated for certain policies. And so it's always about finding that common ground and finding where certain policy alternatives and solutions can find those compromises, and where we can create good policy, because that's what's more important, is good policy over partisan policy.
Candidate Roars.
Thank you. I believe that most legislators and candidates agree on what the problem is. Where we tend to diverge is what's the best way to solve that problem. And so I think the more solutions you have coming to the table, the better solution we're going to have for the entire state. With my role with the Nurses Association as the Vice President of Government Relations, one of my jobs was to be the lobbyist on behalf of nurses in the state of North Dakota. And working in the healthcare realm, you do need to be able to work with people on both sides of the aisle. So that is something that I've been able to do. Working in healthcare, you need to be able to meet every patient where they are. And so I believe that that's something that my training also helps me to do, is be able to see a situation from every perspective.
Candidate Beadle.
I don't think this is an issue that anybody questions, that I have the experience and the track record of working across the aisle. You can ask any of the members of the minority party or any members in the legislature about my track record, or look at my co-sponsor history and see that I'm always happy to work with individuals from both parties. I strongly believe that any good idea deserves merit and deserves debate and discussion, and should be advanced regardless of where it comes from. I think in our state we have much more of an urban-rural divide, east-west divide, as opposed to the Democrat-Republican divide. That being said, one of the ways that we can make sure that we have good bipartisan conversation going forward is to have a common agreement on what facts are. And as long as we don't distort facts and throw bombs for the sake of political gain, then we can make sure we always have good dialogue across parties. For example, and it was already brought up in this forum, the oil tax reduction in last session always gets a lot of play. The we cut oil tax, look at how much it killed our revenue. When in fact, if you look at what the effects of the bill were, by eliminating all of the triggers that were in play with oil tax, and all of those things would have taken effect due to the commodity pricing in the last biennium. We brought in $1.3 billion of more revenue because of the change we did to the oil tax funding formula last time. So as long as we can start agreeing on common facts, we won't have any issues dealing with the partisan divide.
Candidate Buffalo.
Thank you. I think it's important to first declare peace, because at the end of the day, we're all North Dakotans. We all want a healthier, happier, more prosperous North Dakota for not only our generation, but the future generations to come. I'm a parent, I'm a mom, and so our children are watching. And what kind of example are we going to portray for the younger generation coming up? So I think it's really important to realize that we are really all on the same team working for North Dakotans. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So our next question, we'll start with Candidate Kitzman. So this is kind of a combination of multiple questions that we've gotten up here. How does the state generate income in order to have a balanced budget while creating a strong economy for the future without oil income? Or maybe not being dependent upon oil income. We'll phrase it that way. Candidate Kitzman.
Diversifying our economy, building up these tech jobs, I think is a wonderful way of helping to do that. It's tough because our economy is largely dependent on just a couple of key factors, and I'm not saying that those sectors need to go away, but if we build up other sources of revenue, if we build up those high-paying jobs, if we convince our students to stay here in the state rather than moving away, I think that's going to broaden our tax base. I think that's going to give us the income that we need.
Candidate Garrick.
When you're talking about increasing or decreasing revenue, or just talking about revenue in general, it's such a broad spectrum of where you're getting that money from. So it's a conversation that needs to be had, and needs to be a bipartisan conversation about where the state is getting its money from. But as we're seeing increasing demands from different areas within our state for where that money needs to go in our budget, we also need to be looking at where we're getting our money from so that we're creating that balanced budget. A way we could do that is starting by improving our economy through, like what John said, by diversifying. Like he said, we have very key sectors, but looking to expand and invest in other areas is really important, especially because North Dakota is prime economic real estate, especially for businesses to come here. And having so many students coming out of K through 12 and higher ed, we have a large workforce that's going to be coming up in the works. And then also just improving the lives of individuals, so ensuring economic security among our North Dakotans.
And Candidate Roars.
I think we can all agree that a diverse economy is a healthy economy, but one piece of that is still we do need energy. We need the ag industry, we need manufacturing, we need all of them, but we need to find what's that balance so that one is when one is having a downswing, hopefully another one is having an upswing so that we have that stable income coming into our state. One of the things that I think we can do to help with that is, like I talked about earlier, that career academy. How do we improve the quantity of graduates that we have that are going into trades so that we can fill the jobs that are open currently and grow some of those industries and really put that balance into our economy?
Candidate Beadle.
By far, the three biggest drivers of our state revenue come from agriculture, energy, and then tourism, which encompasses a lot of the sales tax dollars and revenue coming through the state. I think in order to make sure that our economy continues to thrive, grow, and expand, we need the diversification. We're adding more healthcare jobs as that becomes more of a need for some of our population. Then that's an area that we're able to expand, grow that economic sector. We have developed a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem here. If you look at groups like Emerging Prairie, 1 Million Cups, what you see going on there and the growth in tech sector and startups and entrepreneurs is unparalleled. And then also we can continue to grow, thrive in our economy by making sure that we're investing in research, investing in public-private partnerships with our universities. That's been tremendously effective with the unmanned aviation systems up at UND, with some of the nanotechnology and biomedical research here at NDSU as well as UND, and some of our ag research we've been able to do here. Those public-private partnerships, growing research and investing in that from the state level, really will help make sure that we have a very vibrant, strong economy going forward.
Candidate Buffalo.
Thank you. So I believe that we can create a stronger economy by building off of what's already existing, our existing structures. I like to echo the tourism. There's a great opportunity there in tapping into our tourism industry, strengthening the relationships with our tribal nations, solar and wind energy, hemp farms, entrepreneurship ventures, agriculture, and the farm to kitchen table initiatives. Also building off on our winery and breweries that are popping up across the state. But again, just strengthening our relationships throughout the rural and urban communities of North Dakota will help ensure a strong economy. Thank you.
And Candidate Baining.
Thank you. When it comes to that, I think one of the things we really need to take a look at is if we have a lot of entrepreneurs here in the state. We have a lot of job openings out there in the private sector for construction workers and plumbers and so on and so forth. I think we need to get these people trained. We need to have someone to help them to get trained out there and so forth. That is the big issue out there. It's not so bad out in the larger cities, but you get into rural areas. That's one thing we really need to address, even in the city of Fargo, in the urban areas. It's hard to find some of these people to take these jobs. I think we need to work with these entrepreneurs out there, back them up, get them training if they need training. One of the biggest things I think that was for Fargo was the Renaissance Zone. It was a private-public sector partnership out there, and it's worked very well. It's created jobs. It's created tax revenue that's going to be out there for many, many years to come. And when it comes to raising taxes and so forth, they always have to take and remember the people that pay the taxes, whether it's the property tax, the sales tax, whatever tax it is. We always have to think of the ones that are on a fixed income, because their income does not go up, and we keep raising taxes up. Their income shrinks to lesser and lesser, and it's harder for them to survive.
Okay. All right, thank you. So for our next question, we'll start back over here at candidate Gehrig. What do you propose the state does to keep recent grads from moving out of North Dakota?
I think it starts with, I guess, ensuring that there's economic opportunities available for students that are graduating from our higher education institutions, but also out of K through 12. So having tech schools and trade schools and apprenticeships available for students that necessarily don't want to go into higher ed or four-year university. So having those options available, and then also bringing those more into high school, which the Department of Public Instruction has done a very good job of in our high schools, which we need to see more of in rural schools. But preparing students earlier on, so that they're more prepared to go into the workforce, and then also just expanding services and investments in those services such as childcare, healthcare, so that's easier or there's more tangible benefits to staying in North Dakota than there currently are right now.
Candidate Roars.
I remember growing up hearing a joke from the governor in South Dakota that their second greatest export was college graduates. And I think that when I moved to North Dakota, that was probably a relatively true statement, at least what I saw on a daily basis at work. What I've seen in the last few years is a shift to really working as business organizations to improving the culture so that our graduates do want to stay here. They want to work at our companies. And I think the more that the state can do to get out of the way of those businesses so that they can really create the environment that our graduates want to stay in and create that community that our graduates want to stay in, I think that it will end up happening as a downstream effect.
Candidate Beadle.
I think it all starts off with opportunities. As long as we create good jobs, have a diversified economy, make sure that this is a good area to start a business, to work in a business, and to really be able to have that opportunity to explore your passion, then I think people will stick around here. I think in order to make sure that people understand the opportunities here, then we have to start that off early on. So in the K-12 level, through programs like the Career Academy, we can get people connected so that they understand what sort of job opportunities are out there, because a lot of people don't know what we have in state in terms of needs and career opportunities. So we can start that off with programs like the Career Academy. We can do a better job in our university system of connecting careers to degrees so that people understand what path they need to go to in order to see different opportunities that are out there. And then we can work to invest in quality of life opportunities. Make sure that our regional airports have the resources they need so that people can travel when they want to, or that they have entertainment venues around here so that they can go and see those things to do and have those opportunities. I know the Fargo Youth Commission had brought that up last week when the governor was here, making sure that you have things to do and opportunities for people to have entertainment. And so I think as long as we continue to invest in the quality of life side and the education side, I think that'll help keep all the grads here in state.
Candidate Buffalo.
I think, again, by leading by example as professionals, showing that we do have a healthy workforce in North Dakota that will get graduates excited to want to stay in North Dakota, also creating a welcoming environment across North Dakota. I too am a product of attending different pathway programs in my younger days. I attended the Indians into Medicine program at UND, a 6-week Summer of Excellence program every summer. Also, Minot State has a College for Kids program, so definitely strengthening the pathways for our younger children going into higher education. And again, bringing a more healthier, welcoming community for all North Dakotans.
Candidate Manning.
Thank you. The Career Academy, I've heard some stuff about that. I was to a couple of things with them. I think it's a very good program out there. I think we need to get these younger kids out there involved. Maybe they want to be a carpenter, but yet they don't know how to do it, where to get the job. People don't want to hire some young guy out of high school or in high school because he doesn't know how to do the job. I think that's when we have to actually loosen some of our laws and regulations out there to allow students to go out and work in some of these workforces, construction, plumbing, and so forth. They make really good money. There's a lot of these plumbers, electricians, carpenters that make more money than college graduates coming out of college, out of 2-year and 4-year degrees. I think it's a it's a very good honorable degrees, jobs out there. I think that's one of the things we really need to look at. We all don't need to go to college to be a carpenter, a plumber, and so forth. It's down in the trenches. I think we have to tell these young kids, you don't have to go to college, it's okay, but if you can go out and get yourself a darn good paying job out there, and when you get a job, you don't have to worry about paying all your student loans and all that stuff back too. So I mean, I think it is a win-win for some students, but not for all.
Candidate Kitzman?
I agree. It does come down to opportunities. If you can get good paying jobs here in North Dakota, you're going to stay in North Dakota. Like what Randy said about, opportunities where you're not going to have, piles of student debt that you have to spend the rest of your life repaying. I think if that is an environment that we can give to the people that we are educating here in North Dakota, I think they're likely to stick around.
All right. So our next question, we'll start with candidate Roars. Should the legacy fund income or interest be used for one-time or ongoing expenses? And basically kind of give examples of things where maybe you would or would not support using legacy fund income or interest to support.
Okay. I do support use of the interest only, not the principal at this time. The legacy fund was put in place to ensure that the benefits from the oil revenue right now is there for future generations. And so I would not support touching the principal. The interest, however, I think we can find some interesting and innovative ways to utilize that. I would not be in favor of using it for ongoing costs, but for one-time costs, things like infrastructure, water, roads, things like that we could possibly, one of the ideas that I heard was utilizing it to be able to get a lower interest rate loan for some of the municipalities, and so things like that will end up saving on property taxes in the long run.
Candidate Beadle?
So I don't support going after the principal at this point, but I think up to about 3/4 of the interest, I think would be fair game to have a conversation about. I think we do want to make sure that some of that interest is continuing to be reinvested back into the fund so that we can continue to grow it and provide really tremendous growth opportunities for everyone down the line. But I think some areas that we can look at funding using some of the interest is kind of, and I'll go back to a bill that I sponsored the 2015 legislative session. I sponsored a bill that was a play on the North Dakota Promise idea, where we would utilize some of the interest revenue coming out of the legacy fund in order to provide fully paid tuition to merit level students within our university system, to make sure that our best and brightest were going to be able to be retained within North Dakota, that they would go to a North Dakota institution, have an incentive to do that, because we know that if they go to North Dakota institution, they're much more likely to stay here and work here than if they went to an out-of-state institution. So I think programs like education are a significant area that we can invest that in, especially with that scholarship mantra like I had before. Additionally, heavy level infrastructure investments, FM diversion, making sure that we have the funding that we need for that, because that project's coming in with higher dollars than we needed. That's another area that we can look at for funding out of that interest revenue. But I would certainly say we don't want it to fund general obligations and operations. We want that to be making truly legacy investments into our state.
Okay. Candidate Buffalo?
Thank you. I will say that I'm not too familiar with the legacy fund, but I do know that, if the legacy fund is going to be used to invest in North Dakota's legacy now, to preserve our educational systems and to ensure access to healthcare, then yes, I support it. But if it is just going to be tapped into to make up for poor legislative decisions, then I have a hard time supporting the legacy fund to begin with. So thank you.
Candidate Baining?
Thank you. When it comes to legacy fund, I think it is going to be there for the legacy, for the many futures, for years and generations to come. I'd only support of using a portion of the interest or the revenue coming off of that, and it's really hard to tell. We'll find out here what actual interest and revenue is. But I think we can use a lot of that for infrastructure, maybe building schools on campuses, higher ed, and so forth. But I think that's one of the areas I would be not in favor of using for ongoing funding, because that we're going down a hole there. In these last sessions, we did a lot of one-time funding out there in order not to increase the budgets out there, because we'd have been in real trouble. But I think one-time funding out there for infrastructure, we have water needs out here, whether it's the flooding or the water from the Missouri River. We do have needs for water and to hold water back, so it's kind of a two-pronged sword. But I think that's one of the issues where we need to use it for those kinds of things, not just here but around the state.
Candidate Kitzman?
Actually, very much agree with what Representative Beadle said. Don't spend the principal, only spend part of the interest, and spend that interest on things that are enhancing North Dakota's legacy. I love the idea of scholarships. Yes, I think those are the kind of one-time expenditures that you want to use this funding for. I don't think you want it for just general funds.
Candidate Garrick?
I do support tapping into the interest for the legacy fund, maybe not in full, but at least in some parts, at least to support large projects or things that have a substantial ticket to it. It could be things that involve infrastructure, large projects involved with that, or it could relate to education, whether it be early childhood, or K through 12 or higher ed. That would be a conversation that would need to be had at this in Bismarck. I don't support taking it out of the principal, though, and definitely not using any of that money for ongoing expenses. That's a conversation that needs to be had in regards to the budget and revenue streams coming into the state.
Okay, thank you.
Real quick, just for awareness for everyone, the Legacy Fund has about $5.5 billion in it. The interest is projected to be about $350 million. So for those that don't know what we're talking about, that's what we're at.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think Candidate Beadle, our next question is starting with you. So in this era of budget cuts, how do you decide which departments get a flat percentage cut versus making the decision more on a department-by-department basis?
Well, I think we need to take a department-by-department basis right off the bat. Doing an across-the-board cut isn't the solution for anyone. I think in terms of how you're prioritizing, you look at the impact, you look at the additional revenue streams that can be generated, and other opportunities for funding that are out there in order to offset some of those reductions that need to be made. But I think it starts off with kind of doing some zero-based budgeting, see what the actual needs are, start from the ground and build the budget back up. We can't always look at what we did last time and then work off of there. That's not a good way to do budgeting. You need to see with what the revenue is, what the need is, and make that adjustment accordingly. I think, when we talk about how to prioritize programs, higher ed took a bit of a haircut just because they had other funding streams. They had federal program money that could be brought in. They had commercialization of patent money that could be brought in. They had tuition revenue that could be brought in. There are other revenue streams. So when we're looking at making adjustments, we have to say, okay, does a reduction here result in a 3-to-1 federal match reduction? Because if so, that's going to be a significantly more of a harm to that agency than reductions in some other departments. So I think there's ways that we can go about prioritizing it to minimize harms, but it's just all about seeing what the actual needs are and where those priorities should be.
Candidate Buffalo?
I believe that there needs to be a needs assessment conducted to see where the greatest need is. We also need to look further upstream and being more proactive in trying to understand why we have certain social issues that exist across our state, and not really thinking like, oh wow, today where did we come up with this, where did this opioid crisis come from, when no, it's actually been here all along. So again, looking at things further upstream and trying to be more proactive rather than crisis mode and then cutting people that need these services the most. So definitely look at a community needs assessment. Thank you.
Candidate Baining?
I think one of the things we'll be looking at when we get back to Bismarck, we'll be looking at the governor's budget out there. He'll have some proposals out there as a guideline for us. He's going to probably want to take some more money out of some other budgets, less money out of some other budgets. Human services, that's probably a budget that's going to probably stay about the same, maybe have an increase, possibly depending upon how the funding is with our state revenues and with the federal revenues. But we do have to take each one on a case-by-case basis out there. One thing we really have to listen to is the people that run these agencies, what their needs are, what they foresee for their needs. We really don't. We work with the governor's office and the agencies out to set the priorities. Sometimes all the priorities don't get met, but we try to get the right priorities that they need. So it is a juggling game. We may have to take some money from one agency. I know the courts are going to need some more money this next biennium because they're struggling out there because we cut a lot out of there. We tried to put some more back, but we were unable to. But we will have to take each agency by agency.
Candidate Kitzman?
Well, it does, again, come down to funding priorities. Yeah, obviously, you're going to have some things that are higher priority than others. But as Ruth said, understanding what the needs are behind all of these services, and making sure you're not cutting the things that are preventative, where you are spending less to address the problem earlier, as opposed to spending more to fix the problem later on because you've slashed the budget previously.
Candidate Garrick.
As it applies to cuts, we need to evaluate the needs and demands on an individual basis, like Representative Beadle was saying, on a department-by-department basis. But more importantly, I do believe that we also need to evaluate the economic and fiscal impacts, both short and long-term, of those budget cuts to those individual cases. But it all starts by determining the state's policy priorities, which will then lead us to better make those decisions regarding budget cuts.
Candidate Roars.
So with the legislature only meeting for 4 months every 2 years, the legislature really relies on those agencies to know their own budget, know their needs, and be able to differentiate between needs and wants. I think that the governor's direction to have them look at an across-the-board budget was a good exercise, even if that isn't how the actual budget is built. I think the exercise in looking at your budget and saying, if I had to take a 10% cut, what would go, what would stay, and what would the impact of that be? And I think that that really does feed into that needs assessment. It helps you to understand what is the vulnerability that we're creating by decreasing funding in certain areas, how do we minimize that harm, and how do we make sure that when we do the actual department by department budget, we're doing it from a place where we really truly understand what their needs are.
Okay, thank you. So for our next question, we'll start with Candidate Buffalo. So what can the legislature do to ensure that North Dakotans who do not have a street address be allowed to vote? So with the current Supreme Court ruling, kind of changing what is required in order to vote in North Dakota, basically somebody without a street address, like this question references people without a home, or some people maybe without a home address on their ID, wouldn't be allowed to vote. So what can the legislature do in the upcoming session to remedy this situation?
I think for starters, not do things last minute, which leaves people scrambling and in a crisis mode. We want to be proactive and work further upstream and try to prevent stress reduction all the way around, right? Stress reduction contributes to a healthier environment, a healthier family, healthier individuals, healthier economy. So if we can be more proactive and less last minute in putting people in crisis mode, I think that's a good start. So I know that there's different limitations that the legislature has, but trying to do some really sound community outreach, building relationships early on would be key in this, along with good communication.
Candidate Baining.
I think it really kind of boils down to the local districts, local counties, and so forth. They're the ones that in the state they take and set up the mapping systems out there. I think the tribes and so forth really need to work with them to find the address, to get them an address. We've been in lawsuits for the last 4 years, I think 3 to 4 years. We spent a lot of money on litigation on both sides, a lot of money coming in from outside of state, and that money could have been used to help these ones that didn't have a driver's license or an address on there. They could have helped them get their birth certificates and so forth. I think we waste a lot of time and energy. I think we should have really been concentrating on the ones that needed it. We could have probably got them all with all the money that we spent on litigation on both sides of the aisle. They all could have had an ID and so forth. And I think that's one of the things we really need to take a look at in the next session. I think one of the things I'd like to propose next session is that we work with the tribes on there. If they don't have one, we'll help them get their birth certificates free of charge, because I think their cost, I just got mine, I think they're $25. So I know there's going to be some issues trying to track some of them down because they don't live in a state, which is an issue. Try to find out whether it's, someone on there or whether it's wherever in the state. But I think that's one of the things we really need to take a look at.
Candidate Kitzman.
Again, I think partnering with tribal governments would be a wonderful idea on this. Working closely with them to ensure that everyone who lives in North Dakota is allowed to vote. Anything we can do to make it easier for people to vote.
Candidate Garrick?
I think the state legislature and our legislators should have a conversation with the Secretary of State, the governor, and local jurisdictions to determine what sort of policy solutions are available and what the best policy would be going forward to find a way that individuals without a street address are able to vote. But it's definitely not something that the state legislature can just make a decision about and then hand off to the administrative agencies.
Candidate Roars?
I do support the recent decision by the Supreme Court to require a street address. There are too many complications with the ability to use a P.O. box, in that your P.O. box may not actually be located within your legislative district, your school district, your county, et cetera. And so I think it's too difficult to be able to truly establish residency to know where that person should be allowed to vote. So I do agree with that decision. However, I also understand that there are some challenges with being able to get an ID that has your street address on it. 911 addresses are now more and more prevalent, especially in our rural areas. However, getting an ID updated with your address on it, it may be the challenge. So I think that if we can put some time and effort into the innovative ways to be able to get services out to rural areas, to be able to get an updated ID, and then again, like echoing some of the others, working with our federal delegation, working with the tribes to really ensure that we are able to create those street addresses in those communities as well.
Candidate Beadle?
Since 2013, when the voter ID issue started, it was all about protecting the integrity of the election, making sure that people have trust in the results of the election and everything. We're the only state without voter registration. I think because of that, that led to some of the conversations about establishing ID requirements so that we have the residency proven. And I think that conversation needed to be had. I mean, the other alternative would be if we could go the route of actually having voter registration. That might not be a bad way to go if we wanted to do that instead. But starting when we first made the law adjustment back in 2013, we did set aside funds in order to provide cost coverage for identification for individuals. So we do have that. You can find the current voter requirements on vote.nd.gov. And right now, under state law, we do have areas for if there's not an ID with an address on there, then either there's supplemental documentation that can be provided, such as utility bill, current bank statement, check or document, or another document by a BIA, long-term care certificate, et cetera. So there are options listed for those that don't have an address printed on an identification, so that they are still able to vote, because everyone should have that access.
All right, thank you. So our final question, we'll start off with candidate Baining. So the question is related to the North Dakota Measure 1, which is related to ethics and anti-corruption. Do you support or oppose, or how do you feel about Measure 1 and why?
Thank you. Just looking at Measure 1, it was a measure that was brought up, I think it was from Florida. This last session, we did pass some ethics rules and reporting and so forth that we're currently using this session or this interim to report all of our campaign funds and so forth. I think, it's one of those things. We have an ethics board every 4 years. We get, the people are our ethics board here. I think in the state of North Dakota, they can elect us, and if they don't, that's the way that I think it works. But I think there's some things, if we do get into that, if this measure does pass, I think that's got to trickle all the way down to all the local subdivisions, boards, commissions, authorities, and so forth that govern all bodies of the state, whether it's city, county, township, so forth, and all the boards and regulation, all the boards that are out, that would have to apply to all of them. I think that would have to be some legislation that would have to be attached to this so that not one group or entity of people are governed by it, but I think all would have to be governed by it.
Thank you. Candidate Kitzman?
I support it. We're all up here asking for the people of North Dakota to allow us to represent them. I believe we should be held to the highest of standards, and I think this is one way of ensuring that.
Candidate Garrick?
I'm glad that this is an issue that is being put to the voters, because I do believe that voters should have a direct say in how they're, the transparency of their government. Regardless of the outcome, however, of this measure in November, I still think it's a conversation that needs to be continued in the legislative session, whether if it passes, to be expanded upon and adjusted, and if it doesn't pass, a conversation to be discussed about ethics and government accountability.
Candidate Roars?
So there's always going to be ways that we can improve both our transparency and our ethics in any state organization, in any organization, in any state. And so I think that there's opportunities for improvement. However, I don't believe that this measure actually accomplishes the intended goal behind it. I believe that there's a lot of unintended consequences that will make things very complicated, and as we talked about with the previous issue, I think it's going to end up in court much longer than it's going to do anything else. And so I think that Measure 1 should be defeated. The ACLU has spoken out about how it infringes on our citizens' right to free speech. I'm concerned that I might not be able to use this pen from a lunch that I got, because that would be considered a gift. I think there's a lot of things that were intended to be one thing and the actual impact of it are going to be entirely different, and I think that it will actually be a detriment.
Candidate Beadle.
I've long sponsored and championed bills that have promoted ethical integrity within our election system and within our government operation. I've sponsored numerous sunshine laws to make sure that we have transparency with state spending, make sure that we know where the dollars are going, so that we can avoid any sort of corruption within the state spending level. I've supported bills that made sure that we don't use money for a personal purpose on campaigns, that make sure that we track the dollars for both reporting everything for the revenue coming in as well as the expenditures going out, making sure that we have that all easily available and found, and really just ensuring that the whole system is as streamlined as possible. That being said, I was caught by surprise when the ACLU came out against Measure 1, saying that they had some issues with the practicality of how this ballot measure is written. I think there's certainly things that we could do better. We have, under statute now, legislative management shall appoint an ethics committee every session to make sure that we're doing things the right way. I don't know if we followed that as well as we should, and I think that we can take steps to do better there. But based on some of the concerns that's been brought up by organizations like the ACLU, the Chamber, et cetera, I don't know if this measure is the proper way to do it, but we can certainly do more next session.
And Candidate Buffalo.
So I think this is a start to strengthening the people's trust in our state government. Ethics are the foundation of a moral government responsive to the people. Therefore, I support amending the Constitution to establish a nonpartisan ethics commission. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the final question we have for tonight, so that we can allow the proper amount of time for closing statements. So Candidate Kitzman, our closing statements will be another minute and a half. We'll start with you.
Great. Well, thanks again for hosting this forum. Thanks again to everyone for attending. I guess you've had the opportunity to hear from all of us. I guess I've tried to treat this sort of like a job interview. Hopefully you like what I've said. Hopefully you will be voting for me this November, and I can represent you in the legislature.
Candidate Garrick.
As I echoed in my opening statement and throughout my answers through this forum, for me it's important to ensure economic security for all North Dakotans, and that applies to every single policy that you will pass. It's about ensuring that individuals in North Dakota are able to live comfortable lives. That's taken care of by ensuring that there is proper economic opportunities for them, that they receive decent education, access to child care, health care, and then ensuring quality working standards, which includes appropriate salaries and wages.
Candidate Roers.
I also want to thank you for hosting this forum, for everyone for attending, and being very supportive of all of us who put our hat in the ring. This is sometimes a very vulnerable place to be, and so I appreciate everybody's smiling faces at us. So thank you for listening, and thank you for posing questions to really allow us to highlight both our strengths but also our differences between candidates to help voters to make the best decision that they can come November 6th. Thank you.
Candidate Beadle.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters for giving us this opportunity. I think it's tremendously important and provides valuable discussion for our local political discourse, so thank you very much for that. I believe I have the proven track record and experience of working across the aisle, of working with all the important players involved within the government process, and of being fact-based and data-driven and making good, sound decisions so that we're not shooting from the hip and hoping that it works. I legislate based off of data and studies as opposed to anecdote, and I think that's critically important in Bismarck. You know, I think going forward in North Dakota, we need to make sure that we're investing in our priorities, which includes investing in our infrastructure, ensure that we have FM diversion done, make sure that we make sure Red River water supply is done, ensure that our roads have the resources that, in order to ensure that they're not crumbling, so whether it's farm to market or within our communities. I think we need to strengthen our education system, providing quality education from pre-K through higher education, make sure that it's adaptable, evolving with the ever-changing global economy, so that we're putting out people that are able to meet the needs of industry out there, and so they're going to have the skills and tools needed to be able to be successful. And then I think we need to make sure that the government stays out of the way so that we can continue to grow and thrive our economy, provide good opportunities for people, improve the quality of life of people within the community, and that'll overall leave North Dakota as a good place to live, work, do business, and call home. And I think we're on a good path to do that. I think I have the skills and resources to continue doing that, and I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Candidate Buffalo?
I too want to thank the League of Women Voters, the City of Fargo, the audience for faring the storm with us here today. Thank you for the questions. My background as a public health professional and educator, most know me as a doer. I get in the trenches with others and do the selfless, unpretty work that needs to be done in our communities. In particular, standing up for the voiceless, the most vulnerable, our women, our children, our veterans, our senior citizens. So I'm a doer. I am also running because we need to support our communities with good policy and common sense legislation that works for everyone and not just a select group of people. I will be the representative that listens to all voices and all issues. I will continue fighting for quality education, a fair and responsible taxation, healthcare access for all, and a more prosperous economy for North Dakota. Please consider voting for me on November 6th. Thank you.
And Candidate Baining?
Thank you to the League of Women and to the City of Fargo for letting us use their chambers once again. You know, all those topics up here we have discussed not just once, but I think every forum that I've been at for the last 16 years. I think we have a pretty good system in here in North Dakota, funding-wise and so forth. Every time we come in, there's always a new issue out there at some time. By the time we get done here, by the time we get middle of January or February, there's going to be another issue out there that's going to be a crisis. We do need to look across and listen to all of our constituents out there and from needs and wants from all across the state. We do have to take care of our vulnerable adults, our elderly, because they're out there, they're unable to take care of themselves in some cases, whether they're in nursing homes, whether they're in homes, their own homes, and you know they do need some help. It's better, I think, to keep the elderly in their homes with some help from the state and so forth. One of the other, you know, it's been very good to serve the state of North Dakota in the capacity I have for the last 16 years. And the only promise I can really make to you is to do the best job I can, because I can't say I can pass one piece of legislation. I need a whole lot more votes out there. I need 47, 48 more votes, and plus I need the Senate. So one of the things I can promise that I do work across the aisle. I will work across the aisle as I have in the past. There's always the issues where we don't in some issues. That we all know. But you know, that is one of the things we really need to take a look at, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
All right. And thank you to all the candidates. We just have a few notes to wrap up tonight. So the recording of this forum will be posted to the City of Fargo's Facebook page and the League of Women Voters Facebook page. We will link to that as well. Also, we want to thank the audience for their participation. You guys had some really great questions. If you did not get your question answered, I'm sure the candidates will probably stick around, might be out in the hallway to be able to answer any questions or meet with you after the forum is done tonight. Definitely want to give a special thanks to the candidates for giving their time and effort to really help strengthen our democracy, help inform citizens so that we can all be informed voters, and also for giving such succinct answers to questions. We made it through 10 questions, and for a group this size in this amount of time is almost unheard of. So thank you guys for keeping your answers of good quality but brief. We really appreciate that, and it allows us to get to more questions. So we have our last forum for the night and our last forum in North Dakota for this election season, which I'm pretty excited about, honestly, is coming up. We'll start that at, I would say, 7:15. And so that will be District, there it is, 41. So we'll start getting these candidates, we'll give them a hand and we'll get set up for the next one.